How are you?
Good, thank you. I really appreciate it. I read this story first over, I guess, at the end of the pandemic. I was still sort of locked down, and I remember I was walking and I was just in the woods in Ohio, not Michigan, but I'm in Michigan right now. And I was just so stunned because it just captured the feeling of that whole time. And then also the feeling of the 70s and 80s, which I'm like pretty much a contemporary. So I remember all of that really well. So I'm really thrilled to talk to you about it. So I was curious about, I think I understand a little bit of the genesis of the story, given all that. Could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I guess I did start writing it during the pandemic. I can't remember exactly when, but originally it began. I think, every time I write a story, I feel like I'm never going to be able to do it again. And I think I'm always sort of trying to find whatever way I can into writing something. And I began to just write these prompts to myself. And I think I wrote maybe three or four of them. And then I just kept at another point I came back to it and I just kept going. I just kept writing these prompts, even though I do have what I would call a problematic relationship with the idea of prompts as a sort of exercise. I just, I think when you're a writer, you normally are prompting yourself. And that's actually part of becoming a writer, is learning how to sort of come up with your own very precise prompts. So I think I just kept going. And then I realized, wow, this is happening. This is turning into something. And then I wrote the whole thing. And then I basically did what I always do, which is put it aside. I wasn't even sure what it was at that point. Then I finally put it out there. So,
I think this is going to be so encouraging to people who are starting to write, to know that you still have that feeling that is this never going to happen again, even though you've written so many brilliant stories and won so many awards. But that feeling never goes away, I guess.
not for me. I mean, it's always like, wow, I just feel like it's expensive. It takes a lot of your psychological energy, a lot of your psychic energy. And then I'm like, I don't even know. Yeah, it's that very deep despair of like, is it going to happen again?
Right. This is off the story, but does a lot of time sometimes pass between the ending of one story and the beginning of another one? Have you found a way to get right back in again?
Huge. I mean, what my usual process, it's different for each story, but often I'll write a story and it'll sit in a file for months, maybe years. Sometimes I come back to a story that I've had sitting around for a long time, and then I'll rewrite it, or I'll look at it and I'll be like, this is actually okay. I can work with this. Other times maybe I have a faster process. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes I write something and I'm like, okay, I can work with this. But I always have several stories in production in various stages that are sitting around. Some of them have been sitting for like 20 years.
Right. Oh, that's very encouraging. Thank you. Okay, so so it's sort of in the second person. It sort of does remind me a little of the Laurie Moore story that you mentioned, or well, you didn't name her, but I figured it was Laurie Moore. And did you always have, I figure since you started with the prompt, that you
Yeah.
always had that sort of perspective going in the
Yeah,
story?
yeah, totally. I never deviated from the prompt idea. I think I have basically two modes, I think, of writing. One I think of as more of a traditional chronological, okay, here's the story, it's unfolding. I'm going to take it, see what happens along the line. And then there's a what I think of as a riff, like almost like a jazz riff mode, where I'm just riffing and seeing what unfolds from that. And this was definitely the riff mode. I didn't quite know what the heck was happening as
Yeah,
I
and I kept going back over and trying to figure out the chronology of the story, and it was hard to determine from the fragments
yeah.
whether it was proceeding in chronological order or not. Was it? It didn't seem to matter, first of all, in a way, but I kept trying to think of like the fact that she went away with Billy and then she was with another man. When
No,
in your mind, did that matter at all? Or were you thinking more of just those pressing moments that people remember, whether they happened chronologically or not?
yeah, I don't think it's chronological, and I think it's more of, there is a chronology beneath the surface, I think, that you can feel, and maybe that's what you're feeling.
Hmm.
But it's more like reaching out through time and trying to grab pieces of it as it flows by. Um,
Okay.
the form of the prompting, and then you, the second person, and then it really was, I mean, it was a way to sound very confessional and to sound like I was laying some cards on the table. And at certain points in the story, I am laying cards on the table. I'm basically admitting the theme of the story into the story and just saying, write about the rage that you feel in relation to this, write about, even the part about the prompts was me allowing myself, I guess, or whatever. It's a fictional self, but allowing this
Yeah.
voice to just lay claim to whatever it wanted to claim. And it was a release. I don't think it was a trick. I just think it was a kind of way at that time when I was writing it to let myself be free enough to sort of admit certain things into the story and just
Yeah.
forget about it. Okay, I'm going to write about Lori Moore. It is, I didn't mention her name, but just okay, and let it in.
What was that? You said there was an underlying chronology that I might have sensed. And what did you mean by that part?
Well, I mean, there is for example, it begins with the furnace with me, not me, but the narrator saying, write about the night, the furnace, or whatever, and write about the back porch and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That that basically was relatively autobiographical.
Like listening through through the vent, you could hear everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And then later
Okay.
in the story, I mean, and then we have sort of a progression of, I guess, of, moving through time. And then it goes back to the bullies and the kids on the railroad tracks or whatever. And then it goes to the point where the narrator is visiting the sister at the housing project. So now I'm not sure how it works exactly, but it conflates the things together so that you do feel that flow to the end.
Yes. Like at the end, yeah, we're where she is in relatively recent times or
Yeah.
in the present. Yeah.
Yeah.
The bully, Jerry, in the story, I was curious about. I couldn't get a handle on what she might have done to him, except maybe humiliate him in
Yeah.
some sexual, right? Is that what you were thinking? Or
I was just actually feeling a lot of about misogyny, like you mentioned to me when
Mhm.
we talked earlier about misogyny, and bullies. And I definitely was thinking of a particular bully in my life at a young age. And then later in the story, there's talk about the weirdness of certain people I've known, on the streets, looking at people and
Yeah,
just this overall rage and anxiety and anger about men and the sister in the story, I think.
right. Yeah. I figured it didn't much matter. I mean, he probably didn't need much of a reason to react that way. You know what I mean? It could have been anything that she did. And then this was also with the father was another example of, I mean, I felt sorry for him on the one hand. He has the stubble, the alcohol, he can't express himself very well. And yet, and he's crying on the phone. But there's that
Yeah.
chilling scene where the writer imagines that he could turn the mother over, that she could also be placed in that situation. Of course, that kind of thing happened all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I was just channeling, and then because of the way the story works, I was like, okay, both things are happening. I mean, you could write the story about the classic man who hospitalizes his wife, like the yellow wallpaper type situation. Or I was also thinking of a Virginia Woolf story. I think it's called The Spot on the Wall, The Mark on the Wall. It's a really short little
Oh,
piece.
I don't know that one. Okay.
And so part of me must have been thinking, I don't really know for sure. I'm just guessing. Part of me was feeling this write a story about the man who, is deviously hospitalizing his wife. And then another part of me was like, no, the story where the wife is hospitalized because they think she's crazy when she's really grieving or something.
Yeah. I know. It's interesting because you're so close to the narrator given the way the narrative mode that you're using and the perspective. And I was thinking about how like I used to be a journalist before I started writing short stories. And one of the things that stopped me from writing fiction was, and I think this is probably true of a lot of people listening to this podcast, is that they're afraid their imagination isn't good enough. But somewhere, someone along the way said you could take all those feelings you have, like the rage that you keep mentioning,
Yeah.
and write a parallel story to real life, right? And then insert imaginative moment. I mean, like you can use up north in
Yeah.
Michigan as your setting. So, how does that work for you in terms like, is there something you want to explore, like an emotion you want to explore, and some of it
Well,
might be real, and then you switch it later, or no?
no, I mean, two things. One is that I think we devalue the power of the imagination. We're in a culture that basically as is at war with the idea of the imagination, that it seems to think that only the real is valid, that only the memoir form is valid, only something that comes from your own experience is valid. And so, my philosophy or whatever it is that you have to embrace the immensity of the imagination, the capacity to literally make shit up, and yes, you're going to have what I call axes to grind. You're going to have those seeds of personal despair or personal stories that are the fuel for the work that you create. They're the axes that you're grinding. They're the
Hmm.
things that really bug you. And it could be something really ridiculous. I don't like people who fold their mirrors in on their cars as if their mirrors are
Right.
going, you know, I
Yeah.
don't like
Like an
people who
obsession, like a crazy obsession.
could be something ridiculous. It could be
Yeah.
like, people who put their windshield wipers up, like when it's going to snow. Like, I'm like, come on, man. Yeah.
Yeah. This looks
Or,
crazy. Yeah.
or it could be something really intimate and personal. In my case, it really is family trauma that we all go through. I think most people go through some kind of trauma.
Hmm.
And, that's the seed, that's the fuel source, but the imagination
Can
creates
take over.
around it.
Yeah.
So
And it does help you somehow empathically enter the real story by using your imagination and creating another story. You know what I mean? Like you can get to a resolution you can't get to in real life, kind of.
maybe it's the only way you can get to it
Maybe.
without destroying yourself. My other thing that I think I've said before is that if you fly too close to the pain, to the shame, then you're just going to burn up. Maybe you'll write one story about the time your dad came home drunk and fell down the stairs, and that's it. You're done. You used up the energy that the personal pain created. Whereas if you hold on to that event and don't let it out, then you find all kinds of ways to work around it. And that's what
Yeah.
fiction.
That's very cool. I like that. Okay, so there is a momentary slip into first person near the end of the story, which I thought was really fascinating too. And I'm sure that that was that you worked on that. And I just was curious why you decided to do that. Yeah, it says I have to use as a prompt this moment here before she opens the door.
Well, there's a couple of things. One is that when the story came out, the New Yorker is just totally amazing and persnickety in their editing process. So I definitely probably had to look at that again. But part of it
Advocate
is
for it.
I didn't have to advocate it for it, but I had to look at it. I
Hmm.
think part of the dynamic of the story, it's not is that it somehow makes it feel like it's me, means writing this thing, and that it's a confession of some kind, and that I'm the I at that point in the story. And what's interesting to me and funny is that the legal fact checkers, the legal department, they really were they weren't freaked out, but they were really intense because this felt like it was something like I coming in there is just, I think I was just saying, okay, what the heck, I'm going to take it the extra mile and I'm going to just put the word I here. I
It
don't think
just
I was.
it gives it so much power that I really admired that, and I think that people aren't allowed to take those kind of creative risks, or they don't feel they can take those kind of creative risks anymore, and I felt like it really made the story. I mean, we were talking a lot about misogyny, and then I noticed that there was a moment in which the appearance of the mother and father at the institution, and you use that word appearance, helps so much. And then the ending line about her beautiful face. And there's a lot in the story about, I mean, you don't say directly that she's a very attractive girl, except that there are all these men swarming around. They're either looking for her or the bully is upset by her. Obviously, she's caught the attention of all these people. And so attention in that time was, especially if you were female, was kind of a bad thing. The mother catches the attention by throwing a fit. You weren't allowed to do anything, and you used that word wayward, which I thought was a
Yeah.
brilliant word. So I guess what I'm saying is, how were you thinking about misogyny and the plight of women at that time when you were writing this story?
Yeah, I don't think I was really thinking about it, when I was doing the writing. I just was feeling it.
Yeah.
But I think there were two things going on that I didn't really know. And one was the larger structure of misogyny. Like it's very easy to blame everything that happens to the character on the structure of misogyny around the character, as opposed to maybe mental illness or neurological stuff or drugs. And there's a tension in the story between that that structure and then the intimacy of reality. The fact that now I didn't know when I was writing it, but now that I think about the I coming in at the end, you're getting closer to some intimacy at the very end. It's a very like
Mhm.
intimate scene where the narrator is visiting and going back to this place that's already mentioned earlier in the story, I think, back to the housing project and then up
Mhm.
the stairs, and it's getting closer up the stairs, and then the door opens. So you're at a really intimate moment there. Whereas earlier in the story, there's a lot of wider points of view and sort of about larger structures. To be honest, I hate talking about the stuff
Yeah.
sometimes and feeling it as I wrote it.
When you use the word beautiful at the end, it struck me because there she is in this situation, and you think it's been many years later. She's gone through a terrible mental illness. She's probably not like conventionally beautiful anymore, right? So you were speaking to something that was like much deeper, the reality of her, like her inner self or whatever. That's the beautiful part. And it really struck me as poignant because that's what should have mattered all along, right? And that's what she has left, which is also beautiful.
That I think the key is what you said. It should have mattered all along. It should always matter
Right.
anyway. But
Yes. But
um,
but didn't back then all the time or even
and
now.
even now, it's of course we're still in we're in a different time. We're in a different structure now, but we're in the same thing.
Yeah, we are. You mentioned mental illness, and this is something I remember from back then. A lot of times people would say, I don't know, maybe this was the 70s, early 80s. If someone went crazy back then or lost their mind or whatever, briefly or for a long time, they would say, oh, so and so was doing drugs in college. Like it
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
drugs. Nobody wanted to say it was actually a mental illness. I was interested in the fact that you use the word mania, but you don't really elaborate on that.
I probably used that thinking about well, actually, when I mentioned the signs and symbols story by Nabokov,
Hmm.
I was rereading it last night because I was like, gee, and
Yeah.
he does describe it's about two people. They're both immigrants, I think maybe from Russia, and
Hmm.
their son is in an institution and he's tried to commit suicide. They go visit him, then they want to buy him a present, then they go home. But in the story, Nabokov describes, with his precision, the illness that the son suffers from and tries to elaborate on it. So it's hard, when you're writing about whatever this thing is. The word is now intellectually challenged or
Yes. Right.
it's hard to find language to put around these conditions that humans are in, and there's a spectrum of them, and it's the language is always changing. It's always shifting. And I think I just picked manic out of the ether as a,
Yes.
it used to be lunacy and lunatic or whatever. Like there, and who knows what it's going to be in the future.
Right. But that seems like a word that might stay. Man, yeah, he called it referential mania,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah. So I wrote this note a little while ago, so I'm not sure if they said it in the story or I looked it up, but the patient imagines that everything happening around him is a veiled reference to his personality and existence. He excludes real people from the conspiracy because he considers himself to be so much more intelligent than other men.
yeah,
Phenomenal nature shadows him wherever he goes.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's interesting. I guess it's a form of schizophrenia that
it
he's
sounded.
describing or something. But
Yeah,
it's interesting because Nabokov was so obsessed with certain things like butterflies and stuff, and he, in a way, he's kind of weirdly describing the way you have to feel when you're actually writing, that you have to go in there and be almost.
I have a friend who's schizophrenic, and you can almost get there. Like, he'll say, "Oh, like, don't you see all the numbers and how they connect in this painting?" And you think, like, well, maybe I could, like I could almost get there, and I could see if he describes it enough, I can see why he thinks that everything's connected.
Yeah,
There seems to be like just a little veil between
yeah,
what conventional reality and that. Okay, and you also mentioned the Nelson Algren Texas stories, and was that a reference to being depleted, like he was so depleted when he was there?
yeah. I'm
Oh,
sure when I wrote that, I was just like, oh, okay, whatever. I'm gonna put in a story that it's a little short story that's in a very obscure collection of Texas stories with this Cupid doll. That's these people are going to get coal off this train, and they're cold, so they want free. The coal falls off the train when it goes by, and then there's the doll that I think the little girl gets hit by the train. And yeah, I think I literally was at that point just saying, here's
yeah.
another thing to write about. And I think that's probably the closest to me, because I have thought many times, like, I really want to write that some version of that story. It's but
Yeah.
I
Well, can you describe? So I did look for that story, but then, and I ordered it from the library, but it didn't come in time. So it's a story in which it's a very short story in which a girl. Can you just describe it a little bit more,
as
or
far
what
as
part?
it's called Cupid doll, that's the
Okay.
name of the story. And as far as I can remember it off the top of my head, it's these, maybe during the Depression, they're scrounging for coal that falls off this train. And then all I remember really is that at the very end of the story, all that's left is that the girl gets hit by the train. And then the last image of the story is the Cupid doll on the ground.
Yeah.
No huge plot, um,
Yeah.
just one little dramatic incident, almost like a documentary style writing. I think the depletion idea started to come to me as I was writing it, when I began to realize, dude, you're using up some material here, actually depleting.
Because all of the fragments are from different points in life. Is
Yeah.
that what you're? Yeah.
Or different ideas or
Different
different.
ideas.
Yeah. You're not writing the stories. You're just giving away the prompts.
Right. Right. And then you can't use them again. Darn it. Something I've heard before from other writers resonates with this. You have to let it go and let the story take over. And was there a point where the story took over for you? Like how many prompts you just got started going with 3 or 4 and then it just took off?
there's two things going on with the question of taking over. A
Hmm.
lot of people, a lot of writers say, and a lot of people like who are learning to write say, oh, the character did something that I didn't expect. They took over. No,
Right.
really. Like, I mean, I think it's so much deeper than that. Again, it has to do with the daydream quality of what you're doing when you're writing. You're daydreaming at a deeper level than even a daydream. You're building a structure around images and you're creating something, you're giving instructions to the reader on how to imagine. So
Hmm.
you're doing something that is a form of dreaming, but I think it's actually deeper. It has structure. I don't really feel that the story takes over. Especially because in revision, you're looking at it and putting it under the scrutiny of revision. But on the other side of the coin, you can't write anything decent unless it's beyond yourself, unless it's surprisingly beyond what you expected it would be.
You had the moment in the story where she finds, well, there's a baby who's born. And I went back over that several times and I was like, wait, who's giving birth? So that was like a shocking moment. And then we don't learn, there's a lot of things we don't learn. Like we don't learn what happened to the baby, and we don't learn what happened in many years in between the moment she's in the housing project and like all
Yeah,
that. And we don't learn a lot about the narrator. I mean, he is the observer
yeah.
and obviously has been deeply affected by this, but like we don't know much. So all of those had to have been conscious decisions. Maybe did someone say along the way, I want to know more about the narrator or or nothing like that.
Well, I think it's a participatory thing. The reader is filling in most of the information. So I don't think I intentionally said to myself, leave out stuff.
Yeah.
It's more like if I leave that space, then the reader's going to have to they're going to have to they're going to not figure it out, but they're going to have to feel maybe that's the same person, maybe that's the sister, or maybe it's not. Uh,
Right.
it's not a trick because even regular sort of realistic fiction does the same thing. It's like if you describe somebody going into a bathroom and picking up a towel and washing their face and then opening the medicine cabinet and taking out a bottle of Pepto-Bismol or something.
Right. Right.
Most of what the reader is seeing is their bathroom,
Yes.
their imagined bathroom. And if you give too much instruction, it takes away that. It doesn't give
Yeah.
room for the reader to come in. And so in realistic fiction, the same thing is happening. It's just in a different way. Like I always say to people that Charlotte's Web, I don't know if you've read it or
Oh,
who,
yeah.
but it's your Charlotte's Web. It's the instructions are to see the
It's your backyard. It's your,
your
yeah.
backyard. It's
Yeah.
it's your barn.
Yeah.
You have to fill in. He doesn't go into long descriptions pages of the barn and the spider and all that stuff. Or even better, the opening of A Wrinkle in Time. It's like I haven't even finished A Wrinkle in Time. I don't know if anybody reads that anymore, but
I love that when I was a kid. I can't remember anything. I don't know the plot or anything anymore, but I read that like 10
yeah.
times when I was a kid.
Well, in the opening, The Wrinkle of Time, I think she's up in this attic room and there's a storm outside. It's like very evocative, but
Yeah.
there's still enough room for it to be you in that up in that room during that storm.
Right.
So that a long-winded way of saying that when there's a break or a cut in the baby born in closet, it's not a trick. It's just that I
It's
want,
enough.
yeah, I want to leave enough room for the reader to have to sort of feel it.
Yeah, there were a lot of moments like that. Of course, like there's always when you're a kid wandering around in the woods, that could happen anywhere. It doesn't have to be, in Michigan.
Yeah,
Um, and then there's the listening through the vent, which is a hallmark of childhood. And by saying mania instead of, elaborating on the illness, that allows a lot of room for people to get in. And I thought of two other things like how Richard Ford always uses holidays in his stories, like Independence Day or whatever, so that that does so much work People are already there.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking about how Bonnie Jo Campbell said that she has, I'm not going to remember the word for it, but essentially it's like something anosmia. I actually have it too, and I can't remember the name, but it's when you can't visualize things in your head. So if you said to her living room, she would just see the words living room.
Wow.
Isn't that
Wow.
crazy? Yeah. So, but if you read her books, they're just so amazingly um, rich and nuanced, and you can't believe that she can't actually visualize all of the settings. But um, that's good to know that you're right. You have to let people enter. And I don't think, people who are new to writing who are listening to this would think that. They would overwork it. They would do the stage directions. They would do too much scene setting.
Yeah.
So that's good.
And
Okay.
it doesn't take that much. Even though my writing sometimes might seem very like I don't know, like clotted with clauses and stuff. In terms of making an image, it a little can do a lot.
Right. And you just have to, so how do you figure out it's the right image? Is there any any secret?
I don't think there's a secret. I think that you need to be in the room with the character or in the landscape and put the character in the room or put the character in the scene that you're writing. You can't, and you, for me, and I think it's totally individual. Every writer has their own complex thing going on and their own set of things that work for them. Really different for everybody. But for me, I have to feel them in the landscape that they're in.
Okay.
And the landscape has to become an active participant in the scene that I'm trying to imagine. It's just the way I work.
So when they notice something, it's like you're noticing the one thing that stands out in the scene,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. I'm kind of
Yeah.
casting my eye around and then whatever they see, I don't even know actually.
Yeah. No, but that makes sense. Right. You have to be imagining deeply into the scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And hearing
Um,
the music of it too, the sound of it,
mhm.
like Baby Born in Closet. I've had that in my brain for a long time. I think it
Yeah.
might have happened, something like that might have happened when I was growing up in my high school or something. There
Hmm.
was like rumor going around, maybe, and they hid it, and it was born in a closet. And so Baby Born in Closet has been something that's been in my head for years.
That leads me to because we're closing in on the end of our time together, but I can't help but ask where you're from in Michigan and what part of Michigan you were visualizing, because I'm from Michigan. And
Yeah, I'm from
yeah. Oh,
Kalamazoo,
okay. Yeah. Oh, that's where
which
Bonnie Jo Campbell is, right?
exactly,
And
and
Diane Zeus. Yeah.
Diane Seuss, an amazing poet.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it, and it was fun.